And that is motivated by the events going on in our world, in our communities this week, and the heavy hearts that a lot of us have about many things going on. And I'm going to be talking about that this morning. But I want to start off just by naming a few names and playing a piece of music. And the names that I want to name are I'm getting some information from the Washington Faith Action Network release on this, but I want to name particular 4 names of African-American people who have been killed by police or other authority figures in the past month. And so we'll do that with with a little bit of silence in between each name, and then I'm going to be sharing a little more about that later this morning. But then I'm going to share a rendition, Sam Cooke's song, "A Change Is Going to Come," to bring us into the time of worship. So the names that I want to name first: George Floyd was killed by police in Minneapolis while begging for his life. Sean Reed was killed in Indianapolis after being shot eight times by a police officer. Breonna Taylor, 26-year-old EMT, was shot 8 times in Louisville by police officers who entered her apartment serving on a no-knock warrant. And Ahmaud Arbery was chased down, shot, and killed by a retired police officer and his son while jogging in his neighborhood in February.
Dream Deferred from Montage by Langston Hughes. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat? Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode?
Thank you, Mary. I share our covenant, either silently to yourselves or muted. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Thank you all for bringing your whole selves here this morning. I'm very touched by this, and I want to, for a time of meditation, put together a slideshow that I want to share with you on the theme that has been so heavy on our hearts about Black Lives Mattering. And so bear with me a moment and let me make sure I get this up, and then we'll play this slideshow and then have a moment of silence afterwards. It's working. Please wait.
If we want hope to survive in this world today, then every day we've got to pray on, pray on. If we want hope to survive in this world today, then every day we've got to pray on. If we want hope to survive in this world today, then every day we've got to pray on, pray on. If we want hope to survive in this world today, then every day we've got to pray on. If we want hope to survive in this world today, then every day we've got to every day we've got to work on, if we want hope to survive in this world today. Then every day we've got to work on, if we want hope to survive in this world today. Then every day we've got to teach on, if we want hope to survive in this world today. Then every day we've got to teach on, if we want hope to survive in this world today. Then every day we've got to fight on, if we want hope to survive in this world today. Then every day we've got to fight on, if we want hope to survive in this world today. Then every day we've got to sing on, if we want hope to survive in this world today. Then every day we've got to sing on, 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 sing on.
These and all Black Lives Matter. A few weeks ago, I was we were gathering online with our worship council and realized that this Sunday, May 31st, we're coming up, was the 5th Sunday of the month, and that is a Sunday where we at KVUUC typically have a tradition of having a potluck. And I decided, oh, well, I'll do something kind of fun in light of a potluck on that particular day, and try to come up with some creative ideas for this being the first time that we're not able to meet in person for our potluck, our 5th Sunday potluck, that maybe we could do something online that might approximate that. And I thought about how the potlucks I've long believed are kind of a quintessential Unitarian Universalist experience, where we each bring what we feel moved to bring to share, and then we each hopefully walk away nourished by that. And I thought of that again this morning. Well, I should back up. This past week, of course, I started having some very strong reactions, like all of you and many of you have expressed this morning, the things going on in our world. And the thing that first kind of triggered a change of heart in my part was the interfaith communities in this country made a decision to mark, to create some kind of marking, as they call it, Day of Lament, that they established for tomorrow, June 1st, as we pass the 100,000th death in this country from coronavirus, and figuring that we needed a time to mourn and lament the deaths that many of us are experiencing, the fears and the illnesses that many of us are experiencing. And I wanted to spend time holding that up, opportunity to do that. And then, of course, at the same time I'm looking at all this, I'm also experiencing the same thing that many of you are, and reminders that as much as we can say Black Lives Matter, that in our broader culture, that does not always seem to be the case. And witnessing online acts of violence committed by people in power and authority against people who inhabit Black bodies is a very disturbing and unsettling truth that we all have to deal with and accept. And this is what we're working on this morning. I can already hear it as we're sharing our celebrations together. So anyway, I want to say a few words and spend a little bit of time honoring our need, our collective need to be angry, to be sad, to be fearful that we are living in dark times, and to be able to name those feelings, and to be able to have a place that we feel is safe in which to express those feelings. Our church communities, a lot of times we love so much, and because they are places that we can come and celebrate together, but they also need to be places where we can come and bring our whole selves, and that includes the things that are making us sad, the fears that we're living with. And so I wanted to just I do a couple of little readings too. The one that came out about a week ago from Reverend Jim Wallace, and it's regarding the day of lament for the 100,000 deaths from coronavirus, and he talks about the need for us as a community, as a nation, to lament this. To memorialize those who are either sick or those who have lost people in their families. And he says in here too, I want to read this part, our lament will also honor the hard truths we have learned during this pandemic, that our suffering has been unequal. Elders have been vulnerable and alone. Black and brown neighbors have borne disproportionately the brunt of sickness and death and the front lines of labor fighting this disease. Native communities, our land's original caretakers, have been particularly hard hit, as they have been so many times in the past. Asian Americans have been targeted by hateful words and actions. Our prayers and healing, he goes on, for the nation must acknowledge the brokenness of our democracy and rededicate ourselves to the repair and of these injustices the pandemic has revealed, even as we work for the healing of those who are afflicted with us. And he goes on to say, the momentous and tragic 100,000 marker, he hopes, will not be an empty data point on a graph somewhere, even though in a sense it is that. It's an arbitrary number that we see on a graph, but it becomes something meaningful to us as a nation. And I read this and I'm reminded that however we each experience this virus and the various restrictions that we've had in our lives, and the fear and the way that it's affected our loved ones, that our suffering we are not alone in our suffering. We are not alone in our grieving. And that, to me, is itself something to brings light in our world. And I appreciate what Colleen said before, at a time like this, that it's so important to bring those pieces of light into our world. And it is the sharing itself, the ability that we have, that can be a light like that. Neither is our dedication to bringing more humanity and justice into this world, that we can feel overwhelmed at times like this because there is so much to do. And Sam Cooke's song that we heard earlier reminds me about how for generations we've been hearing and hoping and praying for more justice and humanity in the world. And it can be overwhelming when we are reminded that there is still so much to do. But we can also be reminded that we have done much, and we will continue to do this work of justice together. The other piece of reading that I wanted to share a little bit with you comes, and I appreciated Mary sharing the Martin Luther King quote earlier, because something else just crossed my crossed my screen just last night, and it's a writing from Reverend William Barber III, who many of you know, sort of in some ways an heir apparent to Martin Luther King. He's been doing a lot of work with the poor people, restarting the Poor People's Campaign and other projects to continue the work that Dr. King started. And Reverend Barber cited the same speech that Mary read from, about how the reaction to violence, the reaction to the ongoing structural violence in our society is the contributing factor to all these demands. And he went on to say, he reflected on the eulogy that Martin Luther King offered at James Reeb's funeral, which James Reeb, some of you know, was a Unitarian Universalist minister who was killed during the Selma marches back in 1965. And he says in his words that he feels strongly to add his voice to those who are calling for accountability on the part of the police officers that killed George Floyd. But he also wants us to go further and not ask just who killed George Floyd, but what killed him. And he goes on to say, the systemic racism that killed George Floyd has taken untold souls from us for over 400 years, and it is killing the very possibility of American democracy today. I join those screaming that this is all screwed up and it's been screwed up far too long. But we are not screwed as long as we have the consciousness and humanity to know what is right and what is wrong. Those of us who have faced the lethal force of systemic racism have also learned something else in the American story. We can be wounded healers, he says. We don't have to be arbitrarily destructive. We can be determined to never accept the destruction of our bodies and dreams by any police, person, or policy. We have learned that there is a force more powerful. When hands that once picked cotton have joined together with white hands and native hands, brown hands and Asian hands, we have been able to fundamentally reconstruct this democracy. Slavery was abolished, women did gain the right to vote, labor did win a 40-hour work week and a minimum wage. The civil rights movement in the face of lynching and shooting did expand voting rights to African Americans. If we take time, he goes on, to listen to this nation's wounds, they tell us where to look for hope. The hope is in the mourning and the screams, which make us want to rush from this place. There is a sense in which right now we must refuse to be comforted too quickly. I'm going to read that sentence again. There is a sense in which right now we must refuse to be comforted too quickly. Only if these screams and tears and protests shake the very conscience of this nation, and until there is real political and judicial repentance, can we hope for a better society on the other side of this. I was struck by those words about we must refuse to be comforted too quickly. I thought about that as I thought about how we might gather for a potluck this week. And I thought about that too as I heard the news this past week that in Kittitas County, as we move to the phase 2 of the reopening, that under, I think, some political pressure, our governor has essentially lifted almost all the restrictions on the prohibitions for religious communities to gather. And we had some online discussions with our board this week in which some of us kind of expressed a feeling that I share, that we're not ready to do that yet. And there's a lot of logistical reasons why we're not ready to do that yet, which I appreciate. But I think as I reflected on it more deeply, there was a part of me that as I saw on the videos and the news reports about what's happening, that reminded me that I personally am not ready for us to go back to normal. And I hope and pray that we as a collective community, as a society, and as a church understand that we can't go back to normal. We are not going to go back to normal. We are going to have to take our time, and we're going to have to reevaluate not just the technical details of how we gather or whether we wear masks in public or not, but we have to really fundamentally look at the woundedness that runs deep through our society, the white supremacy that props it up, and the various ways that people are harmed and left out. And this is why I feel it is so important for us to be able to gather in this community, in this virtual potluck, even though it's not as fun as most potlucks can tend to be, to remind ourselves and to each other that it's okay to feel anger, it's okay and it's good to feel sadness, and it's okay to feel despair, but that we don't feel all those things together. So I think that we all do yearn for a time when we can come back together in a grand celebration of our community and our humanity. But I also urge us not to forget that that's what we're doing right now, even though it may not feel that it is so. We are celebrating. We are celebrating our common humanity. We are celebrating our dedication to bring more justice and peace to this world. And I, for one, am not going to stop doing that no matter what restrictions are put on. And I, for one, am also going to find hope and strength in our ability to do that. And all the stories that we heard during our sharing of joys and sorrows, both those that are of uncertainty and suffering. We also heard stories about those little brief moments of light that come to us. And so it's so happy that we can share those together, and that we can remind one another that we, even though we are not physically together, that we are of one heart and mind and spirit with each other, and that we will get through this. And I believe that to be so. And I ask for all of you to continue with your most heartfelt prayers to make it so. And I want to share another song now. And this one is one that may be familiar to many of you, because it's one that it's Nina Simone's song, I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free, that's in our hymn book. And this is a particularly moving version of it that by Emily Sandy.
I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break all the chains holding me. I wish I could say all the things that I should say. Say 'em loud, say 'em clear, for the whole round world to hear. I wish I could share all the love that's in my heart. Remove all the bars that keep us apart. I wish you could know how it feels to be me. Then you'd see and agree that every man should be free. I wish I could live like I'm longing to live. I wish I could give all I'm longing to give. I wish I could do all the things that I should do. And though I'm way overdue, I'd be starting anew. I wish I could be like a bird in the sky. How sweet it would be if I found I could fly. I'd soar to the sun and look down on the sea, and you'd see and agree. Hey, yes, you see and agree. Hey, yes, you see and agree. Hey, every man should be free. Hey, every man should be free. Oh, 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 every man should be free. Thank you.